Hello, welcome Million Voices. Part of our heart is to address the 30 plus million born again evangelicals who don't normally vote in elections to decide who's going to govern us. And our heart is to educate people and mobilize them to make the difference. They're the voices that can really change this country. And our guest today is a dear friend of mine. We spent a good bit of time in Israel. He's not just a brilliant man. You will know him as a U.S. Solicitor General, as a judge, as an attorney, as a president of universities and law schools. I got to know him as an incredible man too, with an incredible heart, not just an incredible mind, but an incredible heart. And he's actually a funny guy too, which all three of those in combination don't always happen. So Ken Starr, thank you for joining us today. And I want to just get right into it for our viewers and listeners. Talk to us about what is so important and why is religious freedom kind of catapulted, in your opinion, to the forefront of what's going on in this nation.
Thank you. And it's so good to be with you again. So shalom.
Yeah, likewise.
The Hebrew I picked up during that magnificent trip to what my dear departed parents call the Holy Land. And so we saw many wonderful places. Religious freedom is our first freedom. It's number one. Let's have the words of the First Amendment, the first Bill of Rights. And the first words are, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And then it goes
and that's more, how does that change in your mind with COVID? What now has changed, or has anything changed with the whole COVID and the government intervention there?
Well, the government in some states is virtually shutting down churches, right? And the worst example is Nevada, where, hey, please go to our casinos, and here are ads all over the nation. I saw one last night on Fox. Hey, we're open for business. Come on in and have a great time, etc. But by the way, what they're also saying is, don't go to church while you're here.
Unbelievable.
That's an exaggeration. But what the governor did, and this went all the way up to Supreme Court on an emergency kind of basis, said, in church you can only have 50 people, but at a casino you can have 50% occupancy, and obviously that can be hundreds of people. So there is discrimination against churches going on. That's not only bad, it's not only unfair, it's unconstitutional. So we'll sort some of these issues out as time goes on. If these procedures continue, religious hostility is growing. We see it at every turn. Traditions are under assault that were not under assault 10 years ago, and certainly not 40 years ago.
And let me kind of shift our focus slightly to the court that determines religious freedom and constitutional protections, because they clearly are under assault. And it's been shocking to me how many people have just given up their freedoms on either the security or the perceived security of what's happening. They've just given up their liberties and their freedoms. And so let's talk about the Supreme Court. By the time that we get this public, any minute or day now, we're about to have a nomination from the president. Talk to us about the debate that's raging of nominating a person this close to an election. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, under the Constitution, the president has the authority to do what the president has determined to do. I think it's more than authority. I think there's a responsibility and obligation to fulfill his duty of nominating a qualified person to be on the Supreme Court. And then it's the duty of the Senate to use its advice and consent authority. Right. That's our constitutional structure. But this is where, John, history is such a very helpful guide. History is so important. And what history tells us is, invariably, this is what happens. Namely, if there's a vacancy during an election year, the president offers a nominee. And so the reaction, oh, you can't do this, is both anti-constitutional, right? The Constitution contemplates it, but it's also anti-historical. So it's doubly wrong to say, oh, the president should just leave the seat open, and let's let the next president decide that. Now,
Yeah, and each party who's not in power makes that argument, but each party who is in power is going to absolutely do what they were elected to do. And so, and there's been several people. I believe Ginsburg herself was nominated in fewer days than the time span between there. John Paul Stevens, I think he was 19 days. There's other people that have done it quickly. The leading candidates, it appears that it's Amy Coney Barrett, and if not her, maybe Barbara Lagoa. Talk to me, if you will, about their strengths and weaknesses in your legal opinion.
Both are very brilliant, able, articulate lawyers and judges. Judge Barrett, sitting on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal circuit that sits in Chicago, has more experience. Judge Lagoa is new to the federal bench, but she was serving on the Florida Supreme Court before then. Right. And so both, I think, have very interesting experience. Give the nod to Judge Barrett in terms of more judicial experience. Judge Barrett is a favorite of the pro-life community. That's taking nothing away from Judge Lagoa, because she has been so involved in life kinds of issues. And I think that the Christian community should be very comfortable with either of them, with both of them. But Judge Barrett has one quality that I really like, and this is the teacher that's in me, John. She's a great teacher. You know, she graduated first in her class, clerk for Justice Scalia, all that. But she wins teaching awards as best teacher at the Notre Dame Law School. I know the Notre Dame Law School. They got great teachers. She's number one, not every single year, but the point is she's a great communicator. You know, that's very effective, I think, for a Supreme Court justice, both around the table and then in the very close confines of that beautiful Supreme Court building. There are only 9 of them, and they deal with one another every single day. So to be a good teacher, a persuader is, I think, a really good characteristic.
Yeah, and one of the things you mentioned, she worked with Scalia. One of the things I was always impressed, given that he passed away at the last 2016 presidential election, and Ginsburg has passed away this time. It's to me, I don't know if this is poetic or prophetic or what, but they were adversaries, like Shakespeare said, who strive mightily at the law, but then the fellowship as friends and eat meals as friends. They were the polar opposites on political and constitutional interpretations, and yet they maintained a friendship all the way through. And so it's gotten so much so now that people have lost the ability to have an intellectual debate and disagree with each other and still be civil. So I want to ask you, this has gotten so polarizing in our country. I mean, the irony is those two people on the Supreme Court who have become the two, polar, they got along, they set the model, and no one wants to talk about that. So part of what Amy or Barbara or whoever the president nominates has to deal with is the brutal, horrible attacks. Can you speak to kind of what's happened there, and why would someone like Amy want to go through the brutal attacks that everyone sees as coming, legitimate or not?
It's called patriotism. It's called sacrifice. You're absolutely right. It's going to be brutal. Whatever happens, no matter how qualified the person is. And we saw that, as you know, John, beginning in 1987 with Bob Bork. And who led the charge against Bob Bork? The now Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. So the idea of borking someone, meaning you distort their record, you calumny them unfairly, you persecute them, began under Chairman Joe Biden. So that's very personal to me because I was very close to Bob Bork. I served with Judge Bork on the Court of Appeals and so forth. Yes, it started getting nasty then. And so my advice to whoever the nominee is, do your very best simply to, just like the pitcher on the mound or the quarterback taking the snap, ignore the crowd. Let others deal with the crowd. You stay focused, and also do your best to shield your family. Judge Barrett has 7 precious children, 2 of whom are adopted, part of the greatness and generosity of spirit of her as a human being, 2 adopted children from Haiti. So bless her and her family, shield them, protect them, and and just say, I'm not going to listen to the noise, just like that pitcher on the mound.
Yeah, and part of what I loved about her story, you and I actually had a long conversation during the Kavanaugh, shortly before the Kavanaugh hearing. We were together with Senator Cornyn, and you had hired Kavanaugh 30 years ago when you were U.S. Solicitor General. And so part of what I loved about her story when she came up as one of the final 2 or 3 people then, and now she's back up, is she has a special needs child. She's got 7 children. She's got 2 adopted. And it's not just her Catholic faith that they're attacking. They're attacking her personal story. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. And so part of the attack here is just this unbelievable, we're not getting what we want. And so what we're hearing now is elect us in this cycle and we'll pack the courts. Can you speak to what would that open up Pandora's box, that every election, each party just keeps packing and packing and packing, and now the judiciary is nothing more than a political arm? Or how do you see that issue?
You have nailed it, John. You have so many gifts, including being a great lawyer. You nailed it by saying this will politicize the court terribly. There is nothing magical, but there's something special about the number 9. There are 9 justices. They can sit around the same table. They can also sit around the same lunch table as they do. Start packing it, bring it to 15 and so forth, and you're going to just break it into factions. It's hard to have a conversation with 15 people around the table. With 9, it works very nicely. And one of the most eloquent voices on this comes from Ruth Ginsburg. And so the clip is being shown. I saw it again today, and she said, some of the Democrats, and that's what it's going to be. I think that fair-minded Democrats, and certainly independents, and hopefully every single person who has a sense of affinity with the party of Lincoln and Eisenhower and Reagan, will rise up in righteous indignation and say, how dare you? So I hope that it's one of those threats, just as FDR threatened, right? He was told people in his own party, no, Mr. President, we know you're all riled up. We're riled up too. We don't like these Supreme Court decisions, but you don't fiddle with these precious institutions that over the long term of our history have served us so well. And by the way, these churches were all saying we have even more protective measures in place than Walmart does. People need to get their groceries, but it shows the march of the secularist vision, right? Well, you got to have groceries, and of course, in some states, you got to have your marijuana. But come on, that's a question of liberty and policy. But the right of churches, church members, worshipers to assemble is bedrock constitutional right. Don't mess with our liberty. Remember the old "Don't tread on me," right? Don't tread on our religious liberties. We'll respect your worldview if we agree with it or disagree. We will respect it. We'll treat you with dignity. But stop trenching on our religious liberties. And that's what's underway right now.
Yeah, it really is. I remember, I'm actually an attorney, but I'm also an ordained pastor. And I was very offended when the first COVID thing broke out. I was able to go to work because I'm also an attorney.
Right.
But as a pastor with the staff that I lead with this Association of Churches, we weren't allowed to meet because we were not essential. So the government was deciding who is important and who is not important. And that's to me was very, very troubling how easily people just laid down with that. And it's almost like they've lost the understanding of what people fought for. Freedom for tyranny was the first great battle. And the second great battle was to free other people, not even just to fight for your own freedom. And this whole, movement almost can't remember the very foundation of our country was to fight for our own freedom from tyranny. And then the one thing we couldn't agree on at the beginning and the states were split on was the slavery issue. And people don't remember this. It wasn't 100% of white people that wanted to do that. It was half of the white people put their lives on the line and died to free other people, not just themselves. You were at the Senate hearing, and I want to ask you this question and then just let you speak to the viewers here at the end. And you spoke about the Star Spangled Banner. It was at the Senate impeachment hearing. Could you speak to that? Because I thought that was really powerful.
Well, Irving Berlin, the great composer in World War I, sat down and he said, we need something in a time of war, we're at a time of crisis, COVID or national elections. We need something that unifies us all together. And he created this beautiful hymn, God Bless America, land that I love. And it was a prayer. It was a national prayer at a time of urgency during World War I. And it was so unifying. And so we have all this disunifying activity underway, the protests that quickly became riots and so forth. But there is within the American soul, our cultural and political soul, a sense of we love this country and we love its values. Yes, let's improve it. Yes, let's reform different institutions, but let's treasure our institutions. And I think that's one of the things this election is all about. Oh, let's change the Senate. Let's suddenly bring in new states. Oh, let's pack the Supreme Court. Do you respect your elders? Do you respect the institutions? Reform, but not radical tearing down of the institutions. And I think that's part of what this election is all about.
Yeah, so speak to that, because to me, I think it can get lost. Politics is so off-putting and so, it's, some people call it war with no blood. There's now, they call it media fair instead of lawfare, instead of warfare, lawfare. And so one of the main reasons that we're so passionate about Million Voices is the number one reason people don't vote is they think their vote doesn't matter. Oh. And yet we see in the last presidential election, 77,000 votes in 3 states out of 138 million. That's 0.0005. That made the difference. And so we're now actually very, very close to the million voices we set out to try to find on across these key states. And yet the other reason they don't vote is they're tired of holding their nose, picking between the lesser of two evils. Can you speak to, I don't like this, but this one is even worse. Can you speak to how people should view that issue? Because they're not voting on the Supreme Court or the federal judiciary, but they're voting on the people that are going to pick those nominees. Could you speak to why that's so important?
Exactly. We are to render unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God's what is God's. I think at this day and time, we have a duty to Caesar, but I think we also have a duty to God, because there are those who we will be electing who will be hostile to religious freedom, who will be hostile to our traditional institutions, or we will be electing individuals to offices, including the presidency, who are supportive of our institutions, who believe that the baseline in the sweet land of liberty is exactly that. It's the land of liberty, as opposed to government coercion and compulsion, or ordering churches not to meet and the like. We have this clear choice in this year. You have to choose. It is no longer, I get to just sit on the sidelines because it doesn't matter who's elected. Oh my goodness gracious. The die is cast, and it's a conflict of visions, and these are very powerful visions. And what I hope is that the Friends of Freedom, and I'm focusing really on religious freedom, which has been so animating to me throughout my professional career, will say, yes, religious freedom is very important. And that's one of the issues I am going to vote on. Final point. It is a fallen world. Let he or she who is without sin cast the first stone. So I think that a self-righteous attitude that I don't like this candidate's behavior and so forth, fair comment. Forget judge not that you be not judged. The point is, we're electing individuals to do exactly what you said, John, to nominate people to the Supreme Court and federal judges, and also to be promoting either a attitude and culture of liberty and maintaining and respecting our institutions, or an attitude of let's tear down those institutions. The choice this year is extremely clear. So you fill in the blanks as to who those are. I'm filling in the blank, and I will just tell you this. Whatever the strengths of these two candidates are and their weaknesses, look beyond the individual character, and you can criticize anyone and everyone.
Sure.
Criticize me.
Yes.
But what do they stand for? Not do I their personal behavior. What do they stand for? And by the way, who are they going to bring in? We're electing not a president. you've made the good point. We're also electing vice president may become the president, right? If you vote in a particular way. But here is the key. They bring in 2,000 people in senior positions who will make life either happy or not so happy. And that's what we just call the regulatory hand and the heavy hand of government. If you love the heavy hand of government, you've got a choice. If you say, I want to promote human freedom, including freedom in business, responsible freedom, not licensed to do anything you want, but responsible freedom, what I call deregulation, and to allow the human spirit to flourish, including in business and the professions and so forth, then there's a very clear choice. But if you're going to elect someone who brings in 2,000 people who want to regulate, this year is a clear choice.
It is. And I love the way you say it, freedom lovers, people who love freedom. And if you don't love the first freedom, religious freedom, and it's believers that allow people who disagree with them on theology to be free to worship and free to have those choices. But boy, we're seeing the very opposite of that, of shutting that voice down. And we're finding a lot of people, we call them faith and freedom, that maybe they don't agree theologically. Part of what I love about Million Voices is all our thought leaders wouldn't agree on either theology or politics or philosophy, but we want their voice out there. We want people to be able to hear that. And as you were talking about the dichotomy of these two choices, I kept thinking about a pastor I was talking to who had studied during the time of the Civil War, during the lead up to the Civil War. The pastors in the North were preaching, we have to fight for other people's freedom. We have to fight for that. It is not right for other people to be bought and sold as property. And pastors in the South, the enslaved states, were saying, oh, no, this is our right. There's examples of slavery in the Bible. We're going to do that. But what was most profound and painful for me is all the pastors that he found in these sermons that they used to write back then in the 1850s and 60s, the border states. Those pastors were saying the church shouldn't be involved in politics. Wow. And we now have a nation full of what I call border state pastors that are saying, this is messy. Let's just stay out of this. And I spoke to a pastor. He was executive pastor of one of the largest churches in the country for years and years. And all he does is minister to pastors. He serves on a board that serves pastors. And last night we stayed up late. He was in town for another crisis of another pastor falling away. And the number one thing they're all saying is, no matter what I say, I'm attacked. I can't deal with issues anymore because the culture is so, it's gonna require a new courage. And so I want to speak to our listeners, those who are watching us today. Thank you, Ken Starr. Every time I'm with you, I just am honored to be in your presence. Next time I'm going to have Alice on, I think, because I enjoyed, my wife and I enjoyed spending time with her and you, and our walk over the garden was just a special moment for me as a man who looks up to you, and just getting to know you was really powerful. And so to me, what I want to say to our listeners is, you're the one that can make a difference. You're the one that can go get your non-voting friends. You're the one that can go explain to people. You can share these podcasts. You can do social media likes. You can basically educate yourself, and you're the salt and light. We've been walked on because we've lost our salt, and you can be the ones to get your salt back. And we pray that you do that. Thank you, and God bless.
Visit millionvoices.org today for more resources. We will be posting more videos just like this with thought leaders across the nation. Each of these videos connects to one of our 10 guiding truths. Today we talked about Israel. Please visit millionvoices.org, click on Guiding Truths, and get more content that matters to you. Also, be sure to like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Share these video links with your friends and family, and remember, your voice matters.